do you describe what you do?
Sometimes, I haven't actually gone on my business card, but sometimes I describe myself basically as a sort of mental fluffer, which is just to go around the place looking at problems from a more perverse standpoint than people normally do. And so what I try and do at Ogilvy as much as possible, particularly in new business, but with clients, is effectively add a dose of gadfly or perversity to the whole thing, which is going around saying, but you could do something completely different. Now that both makes me useful and extremely annoying, depending on what mood you're in, and also at what point in the process I get involved. It's unbelievably crucial how important having a word for things is. I mean, Nassim Taleb's new book called Anti-Fragile effectively creates a word for a concept he says is important but's never been named. And actually creating a name for something. I discovered a brilliant marketing case study recently, which I didn't realize. I think it was Mothers Against Drunk Driving in the US. Effectively invented the term designated driver and then got it used in soap opera scripts. They typically got the phrase designated driver, or DD as it's sometimes called in the States, and they just inserted it into the scripts of soap operas. Now suddenly you can sit in a bar and explain why you're not drinking. I'm the DD. I'm not boring, I'm not tedious, I'm not I'm not a sado, I'm the one person. And then people could then develop mechanisms for taking it in turns as to who drove and who didn't. And in Amsterdam, someone told me in Holland, I think the designated driver is just called Bob. But creating words like that actually is an extraordinarily important marketing role, because behavioral economics always existed, but we didn't feel we could talk about it. And actually this stuff is vitally important. You could say that marketing and innovation are actually part of the same thing, which is how do you change market behavior to your advantage? Well, you can only do that with a bit of technology of some kind and a bit of psychology. Jeremy Bullmore tells this brilliant story that, in the old days, you went and bought cheese from your grocer and it had rind on it. And then someone came out with rindless cheddar, where they'd cut off the rind and people paid a premium because you weren't paying for the rind anymore, you just got the cheddar. And all this sort of stuff comes along and people paid a bit more for the rindless stuff, and then bit by bit all cheese became rindless, okay? So you just bought cheese, like as we did as kids,
Yes.
And then suddenly about in the 1990s, people started putting the rind back onto cheese and charging a premium for that because it was a mark of authenticity. It suggested the thing was sort of an artisan creation rather than industrial creation. So that in order to create economic value, you can do it two ways. You can take something that has always existed, that everybody's just undervalued, and create a new perceptual value around it by reframing it or presenting it in a new way. The Diamond Shreddy approach, if you like.
Yes.
And equally, what you can do is invent something new. But if you invent something new, you've also got to find a way to get people to accept it. And I'd argue, actually, that in the next 10 to 15 years, having had a massive growth spurt in digital in terms of what is technically possible, our next 15 years will be innovation at the other end of the tube, which is what can we actually, what we need is actually a marketing and human brain science revolution to match the electronic revolution.
Direct marketing has changed hugely in the last 10 years. Some people say that it's disappeared, it's become marginalised, and other people say it's become mainstream.
I think it's become absorbed into the bloodstream of marketing to an extent. And that was inevitable. I mean, I still consider myself a direct marketer. I'm more respectful now of the other tools of marketing services, undoubtedly. Yes. But I'd still consider myself a direct marketer at heart, which is the basic principle of direct marketing, which is start with the decision and the action you want people to adopt and work outwards. Seems to be a more sensible approach than starting with attitude and working towards behaviour.
And now that you preside over or are responsible for more than just direct marketing by way of Ogilvy and Mather, how do you integrate that part of your brain and your life with what one might call conventional advertising?
Well, I think the other thing that direct marketing taught is that there was an element of science to it. Actually, we were doing split-run A/B testing, which is, the forerunner of the randomized control trial of the behavioral sciences, in many cases, 20, 30, 40 years ago. And there was at least the feeling that you could learn, that you didn't have to bet the farm on one ad campaign, that there were experiments you could perform and tests you could do, which gave it for good and ill, and I mean literally both, the idea that there was an element of science to this stuff. There's also, by the way, a big economic change which no one points out, which is that when we both started in the advertising business, 2/3 of all advertising budgets were packaged goods. So it was effectively stuff bought in the supermarket, beer, shampoo, washing powder. That was 2/3 of all ad spend, and that's now less than 1/3. Broadly speaking, one of the reasons advertising and conventional advertising was so important if you're a packaged goods manufacturer was that back then it was all you could do. You didn't have any control over the environment in which the consumer made a decision.
You had no direct
You
access.
had no direct access to the consumer at all. So advertising was the only lever to pull. Now, if you're getting someone to upgrade their broadband package, you know who they are. Now, that's not to say, by the way, that advertising loses its meaning, because broadly speaking, I'm much more likely to respond to a direct marketing communication to something for something I've heard about before. And the advertising can also frame the way I look at the price, can frame my general confidence and trust in the advertiser. There's still huge reasons to advertise, but emphatically for that other 2/3 of non-packaged goods stuff, it's not the only game in town.
Rory, I've really enjoyed some of your TED Talks, which I discovered recently. In one of those talks, you assert that when you place a value on intangible goods like love and health and sex, that people may realise that they are wealthier than they ever imagined. Are you becoming a bit spiritual in your old age?
Yes, emphatically, in a few ways. My wife is a curate in the Church of England.
I heard, yes.
And she occasionally gets wound up. I once joked that being a marketing person married to a curate is difficult, because she doesn't like it, for example, when I refer to Christianity as Judaism's diffusion line. And I think this is quite an interesting one. I think religion has a lot of hidden intelligence in it, which is apparently irrational but deeply important. And the best story I came across was one Paul Feldwick told me, which was that there was a tribe in the southwest of the United States who used to go hunting, and to decide where to go hunting, they'd get a bison's pelvic bone or something like this, and the shaman would put it on a fire and wait for it to crack in the heat of the fire. And when the bone cracked, the shaman would effectively say, "The gods have spoken, you set out along the line of the crack." Now, this is, of course, complete whack job nonsense, isn't it? If you think about it, well, that's a completely unscientific means of finding bison or fish or whatever it might be. What a stupid suggestion. Well, first of all, you don't know where the damn things are. There's no way in which you can know which direction to set off. What's really important, if you want to function as a group of hunters, because what's interesting about that particular tribe was they were the most successful hunters in the entire region. And the reason they were so successful was, although the direction they set out in was arbitrary, unless you believe in Native American gods, I'm not dissing them, although it was an apparently arbitrary direction, no one debated it. They all stuck together. You didn't get pissers going, "I said we should have gone fishing this time. It was stupid going over in this direction. I told you we should have gone down to the waterfall," or "Why aren't we going over towards that plain?" Because everybody accepted it as a universal. So the hunting group was extraordinarily effective because it stuck together, kept going in that one direction, and didn't debate things. So what you have there is what you might call the invisible intelligence. It looks completely daft, but there's a virtue to it. Interestingly, I raised that topic it was an APG talk where the former head of the British Army was speaking. And he said, no, that's absolutely right in terms of military orders. The actual perfection of the orders is actually a secondary consideration. The first consideration is that everybody understands it and that you have complete unanimity of purpose.
You're a prolific blogger and tweeter?
Yeah, a huge Twitter fan.
You're a prolific user of both. And I wonder whether there is a desirable ratio of followers versus people that you are following. In other words, if you have lots of followers but you follow very few people, does that suggest arrogance? The contrary, which is you follow lots of people but no one follows you, which suggests perhaps you don't have a point of view.
Completely.
I just wondered, do you think there's a desirable ratio?
I think my ratio is about probably 5-1 followers to following. There are times when I actually wish I didn't follow quite so many people in the sense that it simply makes it difficult to keep track of your your feed thing. But but having said that, that ratio seems to be at least tolerably healthy. You can't accuse me of being utterly uninterested in the opinions of others.
Indeed.
Nor can you accuse me of insignificance or obscurity. So I'm fairly content with the ratio, I think.
I think it's a healthy ratio too.
Yeah.
I also think there's something about Twitter that suits you in terms of your background as a writer.
There's a really interesting theory about this, which is that part of the reason Twitter works is precisely because of the restriction on length.
Indeed,
Now,
yes.
obviously the restriction on length is good because it means I can read 7 tweets in a short time. I can also reject things fairly quickly. I can skim read it because people don't go on and on and on. But there's another reason why it's appealing. I mean, it's the postcard versus the letter. But the other reason is there's a certain degree of difficulty. And Twitter without the length limit is like playing tennis without a net, and indeed without tram lines, for that matter. It's just, it's too easy to be interesting. And so the difficulty actually is a plus, not a minus. And so, I mean, the whole idea is that poetry evolved because it was more difficult than prose. Rap, of course, is very, very interesting because it's a highly stylized form, which I have to say, it must be, as a writer, I'm more in awe of those people than of contemporary novelists.
Have you ever had a go at writing a rap?
I've never had a go at rapping. I don't think I could do it. And I genuinely look at the people who do it extraordinarily well with real admiration.
Yes.
Well, because I've got the feeling that actually quite a lot of people could write a tolerable contemporary novel. I mean, you always set it amongst some really tedious middle-class people who work in publishing already, and it's all set in North London and utterly boring, and everybody's
talking about where I live.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Okay, but actually, writing a really good rap, you can say you may not like it, you may not like the subject matter or their political opinions or any of that stuff. It's a highly conservative art form in some of its opinions, actually.
It is,
but it is difficult. Most people could not do that.
I think one of my favourite Roryisms, and I don't know whether it was a tweet or not, because it's a few years old now, was when you compared grown men using a BlackBerry to Edward Scissorhands masturbating.
God, that's a long time ago.
Do you even remember it?
Oh my goodness. There was something, I think the problem was it, I think that there was something I objected to. I had a slight objection to so many colleagues using BlackBerries.
Yes.
Because particularly as a writer, nothing good was ever written with the thumbs. Which was a line which bizarrely turned up again on Mad Dogs, that brilliant Sky season set in Ibiza, was it Mallorca? I can't remember. But there is that argument that actually writing is important. It's important in simple individual communication. And that business of actually writing things with your thumbs is, and replying to people, in that way, struck me as a bit dangerous because, the slightest clumsy... I mean, one thing I'm fairly assiduous with in emails is I always read my emails twice before I hit send. One's to check, there are no grammatical mistakes and crap like that. And the second one is, now I'll imagine I'm a really sensitive, tetchy person in a bad mood. Is there any possible way I could actually take offence from what this guy has just sent to me? It's incredibly easy to be misunderstood. And so the thing that always bothered me about the BlackBerry is actually, words are kind of important.